Okay, Amnesty. Let's see, how many have we done so far today? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We got this. Amnesty is going to take a minute because I'm going to read this whole short story, and then we'll discuss it. No, we'll discuss it first, and then I'll read it. I went to Mexico to I think I said that story because I said that guy that we met on the beach. I had to blow up with my folks. There's a lot of stress in their business with this guy who's basically undermining their family business and turning it into a shady enterprise and doing totally crooked stuff. From what I hear, it wasn't on the up and up, and they didn't share with me all the details. But so I'm trying to make them some money while I know they're dealing with a very stressful situation with possible liabilities. And then my dad and my mom are also going into it, so it's not the best time for them to have business problems when my dad is not in control of his sexuality, not being honest with her in their relationship or honest with himself about what type of man he wants to be. My uncle, who died in April, would date 20, 30-year-olds. 20 or 30-year-olds, or like he would date young women. He constantly cheated on his wives. He had 3 or 4 wives, multiple businesses. So my dad's older brother had this in him. So I see where my dad's coming from. I could see that, like, you're on the straight and narrow with your wife and your family, but then you have these other examples, and then you feel like you want to play too. I don't know if he ever cheated. My dad did. I don't know if he did. There's sometimes some questionable relationships. He had some questionable periods in his life. I think sometime in our life we're probably going to sit down to try to have more of an honest discussion about our past and how we grew up and what happened. But at this time, there's definitely verifiable stuff between him and my mom that were coming to light. And then in their business, and then me and this girl, and then, I'm dropping out of college too. With the girl, with Addie, the addict, that's why I went to Mexico. I had to blow up with my mom, but it's always been romance first and foremost. I still don't have that much experience. I think I had some little romances, some people I would meet. Let me think. I'd have to really think. Like some internet dates I was trying to go on. I was really trying to get some experience under my belt. I was leading with my heart and I was looking for love. And so every single crush I have in my 24, 25, mid-20s would be like, I put all of that love expectation into that little crush, which might have just been, what I tell people now is like, if you get a little relationship, maybe it grows into love, maybe it doesn't, but like, it's not bad to have a dance partner. She doesn't have to dance with you all night. But like, how are you going to learn how to dance if you don't get on the dance floor? So people want to go from like standing on the wall to like the star on the dance floor. That's ego. No, if you're looking to have a partner in life, accept it and for what it is. And if it's not your thing, then keep waiting for your thing. But like, I think I had some good opportunities I passed up because I wanted to go from zero to hero, and I'm not saying like starter girlfriends or anything like that, but maybe I am. Like, how do you know this is what I tell girls too, female friends of mine, how do you know what you like until you try out a couple different things? So back then I was starting to realize I just needed to try out some things. I just needed and not like some people feel like they go the other way and they're like, all right, I'm going to go get a prostitute. I just need to get my dick wet. And isn't that such a vulgar phrase? And yet it just rolls off the tongue. But some people feel like they just want experience for experience sake. I didn't feel like that either. So I was like stuck in between the two. I don't want to be a man whore, but I know I have a problem with one-itis is what some like bro logic would talk about. Like you get stuck on one. It's like, dude, she's not like people in the Caribbean would be like, her nipples must taste like beer and her pussy must taste like honey. It's like she's not a mythical figure. She's just a girl. And I would wonder about that. I still wonder about that. Do you get desensitized as you're with more and more people? It's sort of cute and romantic to have those people who are high school sweethearts who settle down and they're all each other knows. And I think I read somewhere that the average person only has 6 to 8 partners before they marry. But I think nowadays with our society and we're more interconnected and we're less shame is attached to sex. I think we're a little bit more free in our connections with each other. Hopefully we are. That's what I'm trying to be. More free and more of a dance partner, more of like an itch you scratch. Not that all sex has to be meaningless, but all sex doesn't have to be meaningful. It doesn't, not that a connection with another person isn't meaningful every time, but you can have a one-off romance and it can be what it is. It doesn't have to be any more or any less. Um, but it's a personal sexual philosophy is an interesting thing to develop, just like a personal sales philosophy, just like anything else. That outlook comes from experience and comes from trying, comes from being honest with yourself, being honest with partners. Every woman I'm with opens up my mind and my heart a little bit more. And I'm only, if there's any redeeming value to how I love and how I look at women, and when people give me a compliment, or if I have a good experience with a woman, I know that that only comes from my other partners. Women have been my teachers. I look at women like psychedelics or any other drug. Love is a drug. It's chemical reactions in your brain. Is by processing those interactions, you learn a lot. It's a way of humbling yourself to the other. What is sex but trying to please the other person? So love is a way of humbling the ego, just like taking mushrooms, just like, ritualistic, smoking weed, or so love is a teacher. If you read like Siddhartha, Herman Hesse, he goes through his making money, and then he goes and he finds a woman and he learns a little bit about romance. It's in your path in life. Learning about romance of the opposite sex, whether you're a guy or a girl, is something that you have to pick up. It can be handed down to you from your parents, but if, like my parents, they don't talk to you about that, which I think held me back a little bit in a beautiful way, because it kept me sheltered and allowed me to not. I was like a late bloomer, which I think is kind of romantic, because some of the people, the first relationship I had, she was a late bloomer too. When I was in my late 20s, and she was too. She had a relationship in high school, but other than that one guy, she didn't really have anyone else, so me and her met up. And then that's also something else I realized in life, is you attract what you put out. That sounds like a cliche, but all the other relationships I see around me, and then if I look at mine, you really attract people who are in similar places as you in life. So it's a really interesting thing, this whole romance and energy and stuff like that. But that girl at the time, we had one of these blow-ups where I was like, oh, never again, I gave her my heart, and she threw it away. I thought she was finally into me. Finally, I was gonna win her over. I had a little house in Redlands. I was working for my folks. I was really trying to balance that, not a sellout square, but be cool also, and playing music and drinking more and being more social. And I was gonna, I didn't go to open mics yet, but I was just about to start going to open mics. And then it turns out that she had some other guy on the side, or there's this ex-boyfriend who came back in the picture, and I thought the window was gonna open up for me, or the door was gonna open up for me, and I was leaving flowers on her door randomly and shit. And then all of a sudden it's whoa, I wasn't even in the picture, which was always my history with her. It's I thought I was so close, and then it turns out that I wasn't even being considered. There's I was third or fourth option. I was oh my gosh, fuck. And my best way to get over heartbreak, I was starting to learn how not to project, and I was starting to learn how I wasn't being a good friend to her by constantly wanting a romance, because she had all this other stuff, because she wasn't good to these guys either. And I was realizing how much the drugs were a part of her life, because right before I went to Mexico, we shared a hotel room. She needed a hotel room. I did her a favor, one of these many favors that I was known to do when she was in a bind. I was that guy she would call. So I got her a hotel room because she was in between apartments. And then me and her in the hotel room, I sleeping on the floor, of course. And I didn't realize until later on, and when we processed this together and we talk about stuff, she was trying to quit heroin, and she felt comfortable around me. And so she was using that as a time to try to get off the heroin. And so she's going through withdrawals while I'm in the hotel room with her, and all I'm thinking about is trying to get with her and being butthurt that I'm on the floor instead of in the bed with her while we're watching movies and doing stuff. But after you have romance and you're loved, and you don't have so many insecurities that no one's gonna love me and I'll never be able to find romance, and after, I feel like the world is very plentiful and there's a lot of love out there for me, then you appreciate the friendships, the fact that I'm the comfortable person that she looks to for help. And this year I've been drawing on those banks of friendships, and I've been withdrawing from all my savings, all my love savings. And she has provided a lot for me when I needed it this year. I know her boyfriend probably wonders why are you inviting this guy into our apartment and I'm on the couch for like a month? And he even questioned her. He was like, oh, something. And then she shut him down quick. She was like, don't you ever question what I give Shaz. You don't know our relationship. And I really appreciate that. So she's become a person I can just count on. But it's because you go through stuff. Those people in your life, and sometimes the fake romance or even real romance. I have people like that who we've actually had the romance, but once you take that off the table between the sexes, or if you're gay, even between the same sex, but once you have someone that you could have been romantic with, that no longer that's an option, I feel like that friendship is just so solid because there's not even that doubt. There's just like pure, unconditional, I want what's good for you. But you have to go through times. And so this is one of the things that we're going through. And so my romance in here, in this story, isn't what I've experienced yet in life, but it's that feeling that I have for her extrapolated into I can imagine being in a relationship, but I haven't really been in one yet. On top of that, it's my political ideas, my research, reading The Children of NAFTA and the effects of NAFTA and these maquiladoras on the southern border of the U.S. and Mexico. In Mexico, on Mexico's northern border, right below the U.S.'s southern border, I'm realizing that this isn't just a U.S. problem, this is a global economic system problem. There's Japanese and Korean factories, as well as U.S. factories, exploiting that working group. And then you start to think, well, okay, so the United States, this is a global economic system that goes back to the, I've been on this path as a detective of trying to figure out the world without even realizing I was on this path. Because when I go back to the underground newspaper from '98, we were talking about the WTO and the protests there. But I haven't really connected the dots. And even this year of reviewing is allowing me to connect more dots. But this is an American question. This is a world trade question. When I talk about us being denied our narratives as oppressed people, the people who have bloodlines that run into the colonized of the world, we're not seeking justice from America. That's why they talk about reparations and identity in America. It's one small part of the picture. There's a global economic system which keeps people trapped. And we have the most rights in America, supposedly, so we should speak out, but this crosses borders. And so this is an example. Amnesty, when you talk about Amnesty in 2006, that's also a real quick, that was a reason to write this. I have cousins who I went with to walk in the protests in LA. In 2006, they said the sleeping giant is awaking. And Mexican Americans, undocumented, everywhere came out to their cities and protested. And we had a couple million people, like 3 million people walk through the streets of LA. I was there with my cousins. Some of my cousins are undocumented. I think some of them are dreamers now and they've been able to get paperwork. But these kids that came over here since they were babies, but they don't have paperwork. Our cultural narrative and how we speak about it doesn't include their stories. And I see them growing up. And what does it mean to grow up where the common narrative, the culture, that's what culture is. It's a story we tell ourselves. Your identity and your name and how you tell me you got from a baby to like your education to your career to where you're at now is your identity. That's your story, your narrative. But then we have one as a country, we have one as like a city, as a family. We have all these concentric circles of identities and narratives. And some of those edit out whole peoples and whole backstories of where they came from. They're not even acknowledged. Or in a war, when we say that we don't count bodies of our enemies, they're just edited out of the narrative of reality. It blows my mind. That's a level of dehumanization which is like almost unimaginable if you put it into a science fiction story. But that's what's happening all the time. So those people coming out into those cities and basically saying you can't ignore us, we're here, and we're demanding inclusion in the cultural narrative. And then the response from George Bush Jr. was to immediately afterwards there were ICE raids, immigration raids, and a crackdown. And then there were no more protests. Because that's what authority does, is as soon as you speak out, then there's a response. Authority doesn't have words or logic, and that's why it responds with violence. There's a show on Nickelodeon, Doug, which was like, it was a silly show, but it gave good advice. If you're a kid and you're growing up and you're looking for like advice on how to live and ways to be develop character. Sometimes pop culture offers you lifelines, like the Cosby Show. You know, he's a rapist in real life, but on that show he was offering lifelines for people and words of wisdom. Little did we know how hypocritical he was. So this cartoon Doug was a cartoon, but it would offer you little words of wisdom. Like Family Matters was a really great show too, which would leave you in a good place, it seemed like, morally. But I bring up Doug because the father on that show said once, "You show me a man who resorts to violence, I'll show you a man who's run out of good ideas." And as a creative, as someone who values ideas above all else, I would tell people I chase ideas like a fat kid chases cake. Like, I'm just all about getting my mind in an environment where I come up with good ideas. But all the authorities who deny us inclusion in the cultural narratives, all they can do when we demand inclusion is resort to violence. So it's interesting. It shows you who has a moral high ground. So I'm going to read this now. And then yeah, I'll keep the glasses on. And then yeah, so I went down there. Oh yeah, Amnesty. I'll just read it. I'll speak about it afterwards. Es con voz de la Biblia, o verso de Walt Whitman, que habría que llegar a ti, cazador. Primitivo y moderno, sencillo y complicado, con un algo de Washington y cuatro de Nimrod. Roosevelt by Rubén Darío, 1867 to 1916. So at the height of the age of imperialism. So what was he talking about? Es con voz de la Biblia, o verso de Walt Whitman. So the voice of the Bible, or the verse of Walt Whitman. Que habría que llegar a ti, cazador. That would reach you, hunter. Primitivo y moderno, sencillo y complicado. You're primitive and modern. You're simple and complicated. Con un algo de Washington, with 1 ounce, or what is it? 1 piece Washington. Y cuatro de Nimrod, and 4 pieces of Nimrod. Now Nimrod is Noah's son, I think, but he was a famed hunter. So when you would call someone Nimrod as an insult, it was actually an ironic insult. It's like calling someone Einstein. Good job, Einstein. It's like, good job, genius, but like actually you did something stupid. So Nimrod was actually, so he's saying, you have 1 part freedom fighter, revolutionary, and 4 parts hunter. So he is, people like this, again, poetry, capturing truth in a little time capsule for future generations. Because that apparently is our biggest fear, individually and socially, to actually lose sight of what is real. And that is the constant threat of these hierarchy systems of power, to confuse us beyond rationality, where we actually lose sight of what is real and what is our real identity. Because then that's really losing your humanity. That's what we're risking right now in America. And this is my attempt to reclaim it by putting some truths about the Mexican experience into a piece of fiction. This was going to be a book, and this was going to be the first chapter, or the first section, and then I had like 8 sections planned, or 10 sections. I had a bunch, maybe 9, and then I lost them in a cross-country trip. I got a ride from this one guy, and I got a ride from a girl from New York. In Colorado, she was kind of bugging me. I jumped out at a gas station, told her I was just going to hitch. She didn't believe me, but within 5 minutes, I made a friend. And then she's like, you jumping back in the car or what? And I'm like, no, I'm going with these guys. Ended up staying at that guy's house. His girlfriend was a professional snowboarder. We drank all night and talked, and we vibed. In the morning, he pointed to a gun on top of his fridge and was like, I knew you were a cool guy, but if you weren't, that thing was there the whole time. Loaded gun. He was a crazy dude, but he was cool. I'm glad he liked me. And then the next day, I was on Craigslist, found a guy going to Las Vegas. So I was only with that crazy guy with a snowboarding girlfriend for, his girlfriend was deaf. So that's a way I could probably find that. She was a deaf snowboarder sponsored by like some companies for the deaf. And then that guy, the older Mexican guy, drove me to Las Vegas, gave him some money, and I left my notes for this book in his car. and we had some good talks on the way to Las Vegas. He was going down there to reconcile with his girl, telling me about how he was still hooking up with girls in their 20s and he was like in his 50s. So I got to see that like old player mentality. I was thinking about like what type of man do I want to be. He was like, I was like, all right, do I want to be this dude, just still play in the field until I'm older? Because you kind of see like, I was trying to give him some wisdom, some advice as I saw it. Still, even though I'm only like 25, like with my big mouth, just like running it, like when people talk to me, well, like, what about this? What about that? It's like, he was talking about how like, he had a girl in Las Vegas, she had 2 kids. They weren't his kids, but he was thinking about marrying her, but she was stripping, but he didn't know if he cared too much about the stripping because of housing crisis. It hadn't hit yet, but they were overextended. They had 2 houses in Vegas because Vegas was blowing up. It was where the bubble really took hold. And in order to pay those mortgages, I think she had started stripping. And he was going to bring it up. But then he was like, oh shit, but we do need to pay those mortgages because both of them were in both of their names. But he was thinking about going down there, making her an honest woman and marrying her and stopping his player ways. And so, but while he was talking about that, he's also telling me about how he's still picking up these girls in Colorado. And I'm like, all right, cool. I don't have much experience to explain myself, but we talked about other stuff. And I left my notes in his car if I ever find that guy. And then he dropped me off in Vegas. I spent the night on the streets in Vegas. And then I woke up and found a ride to California and made it back to my folks. But that was the end of the story. I had the story sketched out in this paper notebook, but this is what I completed before I lost the rest of my notes. So, and I think it stands alone on its own because this was going to be like a little capsule, and then the other stuff was going to develop on these characters. But alone, it kind of embodies some cool stuff. I wrote it. I had the notes sketched out for the rest of the story, but I wrote it in Mexico. So when I did that trip to Mexico after that girl, all these stories are getting convoluted. After the girl I was really into, she finally broke my heart for the last time, and I said that a couple times after that too. I found a guy online on Craigslist, and then we drove through Mexico, and when I was on my uncle's roof in Mexico is when I wrote this. But then those notes that I lost in the cross-country trip, that's why this didn't continue, because otherwise I like this probably more than anything else I've written, and I would definitely want to continue it, but it was, I don't know if I could remember everywhere it was supposed to go. But this chapter itself was written on that month on the roof in Mexico, with my candles and my weed from that homeless guy. All right. In Mexico, Old Man Mo had a son, whom he named Moses, after himself. Old Man Mo then had 3 more children. When Moses was of age, he married and had a son, whom he also named Moses, or Junior. Moses then had 2 more sons. He then walked across the border to stay with Old Man Mo, who now lived in Southern California. In Mexico, Old Man Mo had been married. His wife played the accordion on Sundays. During the 9 days of Las Posadas, she made tamales by hand and delivered them to her neighbors. Her favorite time of the year was the heat of summer, when her family would visit the sparkling waters of Lake Chapala. Soon after crossing the border, she became ill and passed away within a year of their leaving Mexico. This was shortly before his son's family would come to the United States. In Mexico, Old Man Mo had been the pastor of a small church. Service began with music and ended with a banquet. Alongside his Bible, he required a glass of water to moisten his lips during his sermons. His cufflinks were silver, and they would show when he dabbed perspiration off his forehead. In the later years of his life, he walked with a stick, and he was known to make gifts of stalks of birds of paradise. They grew in the common lot behind the adobe house Old Man Mo shared with his family. The common lot was a large expanse of dirt and crabgrass. A rectangular building on the adjacent side of this lot had been made into a duplex. 3 or 4 people usually occupied one of these units. The son of the owner of the property lived in the other unit. He collected rent and only drank on Sunday. After moving in with his father, Moses found a job washing cars. His children enrolled in a local school. His wife had small hands, which she used to dip linen in scalding water and scrub stains. Her eyes were wide, and she kept her chin low to her chest. By the time his son Junior graduated high school, Moses had been detailing cars for 7 years. In addition to his normal duties, Moses was responsible for washing all of the cars on the lot 3 times every week. This job he gave to his sons, who came and worked at night. One Friday afternoon, the manager of the dealership held a meeting. For reasons unknown to the manager, the owner had requested a change in the schedule. They would now be required to work on Sundays. In the manager's office, the sun setting outside the window made Moses tighten his eyes. He had been detailing cars for 10 years now. Moses was polite. He smiled. Close to 6 on Saturday, the sun had already set. The days were short, but the air remained warm. Festive lights decorated the car lot. Junior prepared the equipment, taking care with his father's soap. Besides buckets and rags, Moses Jr. and his brothers used a high-powered hose that snaked through the lot while they worked. The youngest of the brothers was wary of this thing. The velocity of the water it projected was powerful, capable of severing one's fingers. But his fears were assuaged by the fact that he never had to operate the creature, and Junior was efficient in his work. So as Junior wet the cars, his brothers began to wash. Junior watched the water envelop the smooth curves of the cars. He knew the subtle body style changes from year to year. Like a mother with her children, they had committed to memory every contour of these cars, part routine and part affection. Suds from the soap crawled down the glowing hoods and streaked the pavement towards the drain. Moses Jr.'s mind wandered to his friends, home for Christmas. He thought of parts he planned to buy for his Lincoln. He thought of college girls, what they must smell like. So yeah, it's really the same engine as the Mustang. You buy the intake yet? Still won't be faster than an import, Mo. It's too heavy. I'm going to get something way light, like a CRX or something. It'll be fast enough. Check it. I was pulled up next to this Eclipse, and he looked over, and I was like, let's go then. I had him for the first 2 gears. Watch it, Moses. We're not even supposed to be driving a lot. You're racing. What'd you do if you got caught? Adios, hermano. Get a Honda, Momo. You won't get caught. It was going down Monday. What about Monday? We're working. Don't worry about it. Just worry about soaping the rest of these cars. Hey, you guys ever think about Mexico at all? I mean, it'd be cool if we visit, right? What are you talking about, stupid? It's way harder down there. If I have a choice, I'm staying here for sure. Tell them how bad they pay you in Mexico, Mo. We're not going to Mexico, you guys. Have a little faith. We just have to wait and see. Are these ready to be rinsed? It's like we were born waiting. It's like you were born stupid. Hey, Mo, don't spray that thing at me. That's not funny. Ha. But yeah, it's really the same engine, huh? But but it's really the same engine though. Crazy, huh? Moses, his wife, and their 3 sons held church in the common lot behind their adobe house. They erected a tent each week that was once used to shelter cars on display. Under this canopy, folding chairs were spaced among the yellowed crabgrass. The people in the adjacent building occasionally joined in the service. Sometimes Old Man Mo would come and sit for part of the service. Sometimes he would just edge the lot as if looking for something, and then slowly retire back to a room. Moses wore a suit when he spoke before the church. This Sunday the air was cool, sharp. The clouds were heavy, the sky cross-hatched with grays. The wind carried the smell of rain and the noise of the nearby highway. Moses stood in front of his family and friends, his Bible in his hands, and noted the absence of his father in the chairs. I thank the Lord for my life, health, and strength. I thank the Lord for rising this morning, clothed in my right mind. Amen. I thank God for being able to praise Him today. Hermanos, I like to ask for you to pray for me. My work has made me choose, and I have chosen God. Amen. Moses paused to steady his voice. After 10 years of work, they changed the schedule. They ask us to work on Sundays, but I'm not at work today. I'm here with you by the grace of God to glorify His name. God is good. Praise the Lord. Amen. Thank you, Jesus. Moses' wife sat next to her children, hands on her Bible. She thought of how quickly life could change, almost without reason. She thought of the small adobe house they rented with the leaking roof and bad pipes. Her mind took inventory of the still unpaid entertainment system and new furniture. She saw the faces of her parents, faces she had not seen for 10 years. As her husband spoke, he raised his Bible, silver on his wrist. She looked over to her children, strong young men. Her eyes filled as she noticed their attentiveness, their anticipation. She considered not only her boys, but herself, and her own lack of prescience. They lived between two worlds, between the start and the end of a journey. And in this middle ground, she wept quietly. Praise the Lord. A wife, a horse, and a watch. He held up a wrinkled finger. Find a good one or don't even bother. Moses smiled, bag in one arm, wife in the other. The smells of breakfast, home, and family greeted him in the doorway. So how did I do? Is she a good one? His grandfather leaned toward the new bride with mock seriousness. She met his gaze. It helped that she stood at his eye level. I wasn't always this short, he said, with a low, tremulous voice, as if parting with a secret. He looked her up and down, then walked around the newlyweds with his hands behind his back. It's a known fact that people of Guadalajara aren't pre-washed, and with all this rain, he stopped in front of her, now apologetic. We Tapatíos can't help but shrink over time. Levi and Maria giggled through the second-floor banister, feeding the charade. I suppose now you just have the horse and the watch to worry about, he said to Moses, and he hugged the new wife with wide arms and kissed her on the cheek, smiling. It's good to see you again, Delia. Thank you for making my grandson happy. Thank you for making a move out, Naomi shouted from the kitchen. I didn't expect Naomi here on a Sunday morning, Moses replied teasingly. Levi bounded down the stairs while Maria took shorter, more concentrated steps, both with questions and hopes of gifts. So you're married now? Did you have to kiss him on the mouth? They turned their attention first to Delia, who gave each of them a hug. Yes, now we are married, so that makes us brother and sister, she told Levi, then kneeling for Maria, and now we're sisters. And yes, but only once, and I closed my eyes. Ew, Maria sympathized, nose scrunched. Hope you didn't have any problems with those poblanos at the wedding, Moses. His grandfather closed the door and led Moses and Delia to the sitting room couch, a professional, if somewhat stooped, concierge. Dad said that you're going to have the wedding here in Guadalajara, that we're all going to have to dress up and help, Levi said, sounding more relieved than betrayed. He let himself glance at the bag Moses had resting in his lap. Mo, are you going back to Puebla? Don't worry, we're back for good, Moses said. You won't see me strung up with a rosary anytime soon. Those Poblanos only have two things going for them. They're beautiful women, he said, looking over at Delia, and their guns. He reached into the bag and withdrew a wooden 6-shooter and a handful of rubber bands. What of the Battle of Puebla? He asked Levi, holding the gun aloft. Levi gaped, a 10-year-old boy turned catfish. Maria looked on from between Delia's knees. That's Cinco de Mayo, Levi said. And who did we fight? Moses started, hooking the rubber bands onto the gun. The French. We fought the French. Levi dared not ask for the present. There are certain rules for these things. Moses pointed towards the horizon, checking the sights. Then solemnly he handed the arm over with both hands. And those French weren't defenseless, Moses added, and pulled from his bag another gun for Maria. Just let me load this. You could go rewrite history. Show those dirty poblanos what happens when you resist invasion. Maria took the loaded weapon, colonization brewing in her small dark eyes, and ran after Levi. Naomi leaned through the kitchen curtain. You know Dad isn't going to let them keep those, she said, as she wiped her hands on her apron. Breakfast is almost done anyways. They should be coming down soon. Moses looked toward the stairs. Old man Mo still in bed at this hour? You just stepped out of the shower, and Teresa was bustling down the stairs. First Naomi offers to make us breakfast, and now you surprise us. Moses, you should have called to tell us you were coming. Her damp hair clung to her neck. She paused in the mirror at the base of the stairs, briefly touching her head, and then stepped down into the sitting room. She kissed Delia and embraced her son. Gifts. I have wedding gifts. Glad I didn't send them. They probably would have missed you. Teresa was awash in sunlight streaming through the window. We did want to make it out there, Delia. We really did. I wish I could have met your family. Delia offered a forgiving smile. Moses held her hand. We're so busy constantly with the church, Teresa went on humming. But look at you, Delia, an ever-blossoming flower. Every time I see you, more beautiful than the last. She sat opposite the couple and leaned forward, legs crossed in her Sunday dress. Married, Moses, married. Look at you, you're married. Teresa glowed, her hands around one knee, her bracelet sparkled like a rainbow cuff, her gaze resting on her son like a bird with clipped wings. They needed more meat. I went to the maquilas. They needed more money. I walked the desert. They needed a husband, a father, a man. And these things I took. Jacob lowered his eyes to the empty glass. Moses touched his shoulder. Thank you for waiting for me. He motioned to a waitress walking past. Moses imagined Jacob's wife and son making the long trip south back to Guadalajara. He thought of his own 3 sons. Sol and Dan were 5 and 6 years old. They were on a vacation, desert adventure. But Junior recently turned 11 and was big enough to ride a bicycle, pick onions, and worry about things he couldn't change. Moses thought of Delia. He pondered the properties of love, whether mercurial, able to break apart and regroup, or unbearably elastic, stretching immeasurably thin. He would make it back to the shack by nightfall. A girl set 2 fresh beers beside their empty glasses. Jacob reached for a bottle and turned to Moses. A jonqueado will come to see you soon. You tell him that you met with Tony in Guadalajara. Tell him that you paid Tony directly. Tell him your story. He should know what's going on. He stood up. Stay with my cousins as long as you need. I'm sorry, I feel responsible. But you know that I only crossed the desert. I can't help with the papers. And my family. Then as an afterthought. Good luck, Moses. I shouldn't be here. He staggered past the stage, bottle in hand, into the white heat of the summer afternoon. Moses angled his glass and poured. The beer had an acrid sulfur wash that stayed in his mouth. His slight inebriation made him feel young, or at least remember being younger. He wished Jacob had stayed, wished even more he could find Tony. They were inside, Moses just a customer. How long could he survive in these border towns? Moses tapped his foot along with the deep bass of the music as he waited, sipping his beer. He tried to picture what an American hospital must look like. A woman, perhaps younger, approached his table. White doll shoes, one in front of the other, from which rose 2 slender, bare legs. She wore a small slip of a white dress with a red cross pressed slightly against her chest. It caught light and matched a nurse's hat, crimson lips. The nurse, who was not a nurse, sat in the empty chair. She pressed her knees together and leaned forward with her elbows on the table. I'm thirsty, she remarked. I'm waiting for someone, Moses replied. Then, to emphasize his position, he added, I have a wife, 3 sons. She almost appeared to blush. The girl looked even younger sitting across from him. And all these Americans? Lonely bachelors? Nobody's married here, she pressed. Want some company while you wait? Her voice carried a lilting playfulness, hopscotch over the syllables. I'm really sorry, you seem like a sweet girl, but I can't. She sat back and tilted her head to one side, mahogany strands falling across her cheek. Moses noticed that her shoulders were no wider than the back of the slender chair. Do you have any family? Moses asked. Outside Acapulco. I send them money. She tucked her hair behind one ear and leaned forward again. Do you like my outfit? $30 and you can take it off. She was whispering now, touching his arm. Her skin was a shade lighter than the coffee wood of the table. It's better when I like you. Her hand gave off heat. Moses saw a group of shacks, cinder blocks and wooden pallets. The roofs were corrugated cardboard slathered in tar to protect from the rain. The floors exposed dirt. A cable, siphoning electricity from a power line 100 meters away, stretched into the encampment. In one of those shacks, on a mattress placed on the floor, with his son sat his wife. Maybe this young girl could not burn, but the warmth of her hand felt as if it could lift a weight from his mind, a weight that bore down not only on him but on Delia, on Junior, straining at their world. Mo let his hand cover hers. He avoided the dull kohl of her eyes, focusing instead on the fiery cross. He wondered what they looked like from across the room. A coquettish nurse and reluctant patient. Girl and her John. Lovers. A dark man wheeled through the entrance, followed by 4 dark brutes. The man was in a wheelchair. He had no legs. Moses rose quickly. "I'm sorry, I have a family," he said, and hurried after the group of men disappearing into the back room. The nurse, who was not a nurse, finished his beer. Moses sat at a table with 4 large, peculiar men. To the left, sleeve pinned to his shirt, sat a man with 1 arm. To the right, wearing a patch, sat a man with 1 eye. Across from Moses sat the other 2. One had lowered himself into the chair with a stiff delicacy, keeping 1 leg straight. The other man had no obvious affliction, which made him appear somehow more peculiar than the others. They all had drinks in front of them. The scene carried the ambivalence of loafing contractors, more time than work. Across the room, El Jonquillado was talking to a large woman sitting at a table. Sheets lay in disheveled piles on the floor, like grayish-white dunes, illuminated by the soft light. There was a familiar pungency in the air, almost sweet. "In 2 weeks, and if this goes well, you can expect more. But I need a better price. They know how far the dollar goes in today's Mexico." What is it? No, this is the guy. "In 2 weeks, and if this goes well, you can expect more. But I need a better price. They know how far the dollar goes in today's Mexico. You're not the only house servicing across the border." The woman wore a flowing verdant gown, and when she began to speak, she moved her massive arms on the table, billowing cloth about her like a parrot with its feathers. "That's the rate for the entire night, honey. I can't change it. I know that you aren't charging your American friends my prices." She took a softer tone. "You know I like you, like your business you bring." They whispered inaudibly. Moses could hear the muffled spray of showers beyond the walls. The woman giggled. "Yes, but I prefer it face to face, and at my prices." El Jonquillado rolled back from the table, shaking his head. "I'll have a runner come the night before. He'll have the preference, transportation details." Turning his wheelchair towards Moses' table, he spoke over his shoulder. "I'll only come back for you, love." She offered a somewhat coy grin, gathered her green plumes, and left the room. El Jonquillado rolled towards Moses. "Thank you for waiting, Moses. Jacob's friend, right?" He held out a hand. "I paid Tony directly." Moses turned in his chair to face the man and was surprised by his grip. "I just want to make sure we're okay." El Jonquillado folded his hands under his chin, thin elbows on his armrests. His fingers were adorned with silver, his hair obsidian. His shirt was also black, and he appeared to melt into the dark leather of the wheelchair. Moses wondered if wheelchairs came in specific sizes, or whether people like El Jonquillado had to scavenge for a good fit, like a hermit crab. "Jacob bring you here?" Moses nodded. "He's still under contract, you know. He didn't tell you that, did he? In fact, we have a group that was supposed to leave tonight. But I understand the guy's upset. Returns from a run to find his wife and kids have moved back to Guadalajara." He shrugged. "I don't have a family, but I understand other people's families." He held one hand towards Moses. "The point is, there are always unknowns in this type of business. But we try to be professional. We don't ship meat like some of these cowboys who would just as soon ditch your children in a shipping container. You paid for 5, correct? My wife, our 3 sons, myself. But you weren't going containering, you weren't going through the desert. What did Tony work out for you? Paperwork and a ride? Something medical? It was supposed to be real paperwork. We could walk right through. I paid him personally before I left Guadalajara." Moses took a breath. "I have to be in California. My family, my mother's dying." El Jonquillado turned his head to the side and ran a hand through his hair. The jewelry on his fingers swam like spiders through the oily black. "Tony is in jail," he said, looking finally at Moses. "Don't worry, he's fine. It's another cost of doing business here. but I wouldn't know where the paperwork stands. I don't deal with the same people. I don't know when we can get them out. We're partners, yes, but in a lot of ways we run our own projects. El Junkiado held out his hand. What I can do is offer you my services, at a discount, of course. Moses stood up, causing the men around him to shuffle to their feet. I paid 15. I don't have anything else to offer. I paid Tony directly. He held out his hands, palms upwards. Mr. Junkiado, we have no more savings. My mother's sick. Please, help us across the border. The man in the wheelchair smiled. He waved at his men and reached for Moses' hand. Moses, boy, sit down. He wheeled back a few feet. They call me El Junkiado because I surround myself with these types. He gestured past the linen sandbars towards an unseen border. Over 1 million people work in these maquiladoras, manufacturing, piecework. They have factories as diverse as the hazards. NAFTA, 1994. Mexico entering the first world. He pointed towards Moses, smirking. Don't tell me you didn't celebrate along with everyone else. And here we are, a year later, paying people in food coupons because you can't even feed yourself with a full day's work. He turned towards the men around the table. Jesse took a drill bit in the eye. Alex fell from a welding scaffold. He worked with a broken arm for 2 weeks while it festered. Raul was actually attacked for organizing, run over on his way home. He leaned forward. Now it appears I'm in need of someone to run the border. Moses looked around at the expressionless men. They wore copper skin and strong carved features, indigenous blood. I don't mean to insult you or your business. Moses trailed off. I just need to get my family across the border. We can't stay here. Moses glanced at the man without an inflection, sitting across from him. Ah, yes. Javier worked in a factory of solvents, glues. He is not a junkiado by strict definition. No, on his shoulders fell the plague. Poisoned blood. Children born with empty heads. He held up his hand as if holding a cabbage. Moses, you do not belong here. You're from the city. Your hands aren't rough. Your skin is not dark enough. Why would you take up in a factory in a field? I am not a coyote. Moses took deliberation with his words. And I won't separate my family, even for a short period. He looked down at his hands. I did not come to ask for a job. We'll find a way. El Junkiado drummed his fingers on the sides of his chair, his rings like silver spiders now dancing on the wheels. So you will, what? Take your children across the desert? The border has become an upwelling where whales feast upon the desperate. Koreans, Japanese, our American friends. He turned his chair slightly. On one hand, they say that my kind is part of the problem. I'm a coyote in more ways than one, you see. The middleman, the extra hand in the pie. But again, he straightened the wheelchair. I'm the reality. These men sitting with you, I pay them well. They are not shamed when I use them as examples. A person, a country, does not sell itself with reservations of pride. He was grinning again. Your friend that you were talking to, the nurse's outfit, was she looking for respect, redemption? Or was she just looking to do her job? Moses looked up. The image of the petite girl, her scarlet cross, flashed in his mind. Once you cross that line, El Junkiado began, the worst thing someone can do is remind you of the dignity you've left behind, the phantom of an ideal. It's not the reality we live in. Our elected officials, labor leaders, formal and, like myself and the madam of this house, informal, on down to the Indian children selling gum on the street, necessity has a way of simplifying difficult choices. He placed a hand on Moses' knee. Jacob always spoke well of you. All I need is 6 months. Right now I'm afflicted with too many pies, not enough hands. Perhaps you don't see the choices clearly now. Perhaps you need more time. He lowered his voice. Perhaps more necessity. But I've already paid. El Jonqueado signaled to his men. He looked at the floor as he turned his wheelchair, moving his hands stiffly, the spiders on his fingers no longer animated. Moses noticed for the first time that he was old, appeared much older when he wasn't speaking. With his eyes still on the floor, he said, "And we keep paying, Moses, often many times over." He rolled himself after his men slowly, a crab dragging an oversized shell. "I'm sorry for your mother," he said as he exited the room. Moses listened to the hushing showers, alone, among the dim bundles of stained sheets. "He disappeared after the funeral. He's not the same, Moses. He hasn't been the same since she first went to the hospital." Naomi spoke as she lowered the plates into a box. "You don't have to do this. Let us take the room until we find something bigger." The kitchen was almost empty, like the house, and smelled of bleach. Moses stepped out of the doorway, reached into the box to grab the dishes. Naomi placed a hand on his arm. "This was already planned before you came, before they came even." Chimes hanging over the sink swayed, as if rocked by the sunlight dancing across its surface. Moses let go. "Ruth and I can't afford this place by ourselves. It makes sense. And we're only moving, 50 feet? Naomi opened the drawer, pulling out silverware. "I'm going to leave you guys a full set for 5, okay? And I have extra cutting knives, spatulas." "Old Man Mo?" Naomi paused and placed a fork, knife, and spoon back into the drawer. "I honestly don't even consider him. I know that sounds terrible." She dropped the silverware into the box and leaned back against the refrigerator. She was wearing a man's shirt, her thick hair back in a ponytail. Moses recognized the shirt from pictures, on its original owner with his arms around Naomi's waist. "And I don't think it's the time apart. He was still Old Man Mo when they first got here for the first couple months." "Did she suffer?" Naomi bit her lip. "They came because of his church. You know more than I do. You've been living with them. I've been here. But I like to think that they also came for me and Ruth, because Mike left us." She touched her eyes. "It was quick, Moses. Nobody expected it. But the whole time he couldn't even admit that she was sick." Moses put his hands on his sister's shoulders. "I've known the guy longer than you have." She looked up at him and allowed herself a grin, a slight grin. "There's a wall none of us will ever get past. He even kept Grandpa outside. Mom, she had a place inside." Moses looked out the window at the field of dirt and yellow crabgrass. "He's alone now, at least in his head." Naomi pushed off from the refrigerator. "How did you come across, anyways? I don't know if I ever told you, but it was a nightmare for us." She started loading pots and pans. "Ruth was only 1 year old? A year and a half. At one point they wanted to place more people on top of us. I thought I would suffocate. There were already so many people in there. Mike made me give Ruth something to make her sleep." Naomi stared past Moses, holding a pot against her stomach with both hands. "We spent 5 hours in the dark, like sweaty animals, my baby dead still in my arms." Moses looked at this familiar and yet unknown person, someone else's memory. "I'm sorry about Mike. It was good for the first couple years. I always wanted my adventure, just the two of us and little Ruth against the world. But I knew he was gone long before he left." She pushed the box towards Moses. "So how'd you come over? Sola's what, 5? Sola's only what, 5? I was surprised you guys made it all in one group." Moses picked up the box and backed out of the kitchen into the cool morning. "We walked." He turned towards a small duplex. Naomi followed him. "What, the desert? With the kids, Delia?" "No, through the checkpoints. We walked over a bridge, across the border, into Del Rio." Moses rested the box between the wall of the small apartment with his knee, reaching for the doorknob. Naomi opened the door for him. "All of these Mexicans swimming and crawling across the border, rats abandoning a sinking ship, But Moses, he's the rat walking on water. She followed him into the closet-sized kitchen, watched him place the box on the counter. Naomi, you really think that you and Ruth can fit here? Moses walked from the kitchen into the small living room. Where's the bedroom? Through the curtains. Moses walked through the curtains at the back of the living room into what appeared to be a closed-off hallway. There's barely room for 2 beds here, Naomi. This didn't used to be a duplex. The owner partitioned it himself, double the rent. That back room is shared with the tenants next door. She walked up behind Moses. But really, Moses, how did you guys come across? And don't give me Dad's the power of faith line. Moses turned to face his younger sister. His mother had stood approximately the same height. 10 years, he said as he hugged her. Moses felt a ray of grief unsettle him, like wind through a chime, and for a brief moment he let himself worry about his father. I just wish we had come sooner. We're going to have to stop and stop the recording and pick up on the next recording because we will not have space for the rest of it.